The foggy San Francisco morning filtered through the wide glass windows of the federal courthouse. Outside, the waves of the Pacific Ocean gently lapped against the shore, but inside, the air was far stormier. The courtroom, with its polished wooden tables, leather-bound chairs, and high ceiling, resembled a modern temple. But this morning, the walls of that temple were ready to tremble. Pam Bondi stood at the prosecution table, arranging her files. Her black robe sat like armor on her shoulders. Beneath it, a navy suit, her hair neatly tied back. Her hands didn't shake as they reached for the documents. As a federal prosecutor, she'd spent years battling corruption. From drug lords to politicians, she'd taken them all on. But this case was a turning point. Across from her sat Judge Eleanor Ruiz. Ruiz was an icon in San Francisco's liberal circles. With her short-cropped gray hair, stern glasses, and perpetually upright posture, she was known for her tough rulings in social justice cases. Yet Bondi believed her ideology sometimes trumped the law itself. The room was filling up. Reporters had claimed the front rows, their pens and cameras at the ready. Jurors, freshly sworn in, sat quietly. Among the spectators were environmental activists, supporters of the defendant, Gregory Hammond. Hammond headed a foundation that had raised millions to protect California's forests. But Bondi knew that beneath his hero facade lay a dirty truth. Bondi took a deep breath and stood. "Your Honor," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "Today, I will prove that the defendant, Gregory Hammond, misused environmental protection funds. I have documents that trace a network designed to cover up these crimes. Justice will be tested here today." Ruiz lowered her glasses slightly and peered at Bondi. "Ms. Bondi," she said, her tone calm but laced with subtle mockery, "I hope your claims are backed by solid evidence, not speculation. I won't have my courtroom wasted on empty accusations." Her words were a warning. Bondi noticed, but didn't flinch. "Don't worry, Your Honor," she replied. "What I have is the truth itself." Bondi picked up a thick file from her table and walked to the projector. She handed a sheet to the clerk. On the screen appeared a financial statement from Hammond's Foundation. "This is the official report from Hammond's Foundation," she began, her voice clear and resolute. "Last year, they claimed to have raised $3 million for a project to protect California's forests. However," she placed a second document on the projector. "Here, in the Foundation's internal correspondence, we see that only $1.5 million actually went to the project. Where did the other $1.5 million go?" A murmur rippled through the room. The activists among the spectators shifted uncomfortably. Hammond's attorney, David Lerner, leapt to his feet. "Objection!" he shouted, his voice young but confident. "These documents are being presented out of context. My client works for the environment. This is a smear campaign." Lerner, a left-leaning lawyer, saw Hammond as an environmental warrior. Ruiz raised a hand, silencing Lerner. "I'll consider the objection," she said, fixing her gaze on Bondi. "Miss Bondi, explain the source of these documents. If they're not legally obtained, I'll stop this presentation right now." Bondi responded calmly. "These documents were handed over to the Federal Investigation Team by a former financial director of the Foundation. They've been verified by the FBI and obtained under a court order. You can be certain they're legal." Ruiz's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she overruled the objection. "Proceed," she said, her voice tinged with reluctance. Bondi produced a third document and placed it on the projector. This shows the missing $1.5 million being transferred to an offshore account. Here's the approval form for that transfer. And the signature, she paused, locking eyes with Ruiz, appears to be yours, Your Honor. The room fell deathly silent. Reporters gripped their pens tighter. Jurors held their breath. Ruiz's face hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's a very serious accusation, Ms. Bondi," she said, her voice controlled but furious. "How dare you make such a claim? Are you trying to disgrace this court?" Bondi didn't back down. "I'm not disgracing anything, Your Honor. I'm revealing the truth. This signature approves a payment request from Hammond's Foundation. The question is, why is a federal judge involved in a defendant's financial dealings?" Ruiz tapped the bench lightly. "I won't admit this document," she said, her voice sharpening. "Its source is questionable, and it hasn't been properly presented to this court. It's inadmissible," Bondi cut in. "The source isn't questionable, Your Honor. It's been verified by the FBI and obtained under a court order. Furthermore," she turned to her table and pulled out a USB drive. "I have an audio recording, a conversation between you and Hammond. I'd like to submit it to the court." Lerner jumped up again. "Objection. This could be a private conversation, and if it wasn't legally obtained, it's invalid." But Ruiz silenced her attorney this time. "What does the recording contain, Ms. Bondi?" Her voice was icy, but her hands weren't steady on the bench. Her unease was showing for the first time. Bondi handed the USB to the clerk. "Clerk, please play this," she said. A voice crackled through the speakers. Hammond's, frantic and slightly panicked. "Eleanor, if these funds get audited, we're all sunk. Your signature's on this too. Don't forget, you need to protect us." Then Ruiz's voice, calm but menacing. "Don't worry, Gregory. I'll handle it. No one can question my rulings." Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Spectators whispered. One activist shouted, "It's fake!" But the noise drowned them out. Ruiz's face went pale. "That recording is fabricated," she yelled, her voice trembling. "How dare you bring this into my courtroom?" Bondi remained composed. "It's not fabricated, Your Honor. This recording was legally obtained during a federal operation. Hammond's phones were tapped by the FBI, and this conversation was recorded last month. The date and timestamps are in the file." Ruiz stiffened in her seat. "This is a conspiracy," she said, her voice rising. "I've defended justice for years, protected the environment, the community. You're after a political lynching." Bondi leaned forward slightly. "If you've defended justice, why did you protect Hammond's dirty money? Why is your signature on these documents? Why is your voice on this recording?" Ruiz struggled to steady her breathing as she responded. "You've turned this courtroom into a circus, Ms. Bondi. These documents and recordings are invalid. I'm ending this hearing right now." Bondi raised an eyebrow. "You can't end it, Your Honor, because I have more." She pulled another file from her table and opened it. "Here are bank records showing personal donations you made to Hammond's Foundation. A total of $50,000, not a small sum for a judge. Why would you give money to a defendant's organization?" The silence in the room was deafening, the kind where even a pin drop could be heard. Reporters turned their cameras on Ruiz. Jurors exchanged stunned glances. Lerner shifted in his seat, but didn't object this time. He had nothing left. Ruiz gripped the bench. This is a misunderstanding, she said, her voice cracking. I only supported environmental projects. That's not a crime. Bondi dropped the papers onto the table. Support? Your Honor, that money didn't go to the forests. It went to Hammond's offshore accounts, and you approved those transfers. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's corruption. Ruiz's eyes narrowed. You can't accuse me, she said, her voice dropping. I'm a symbol of justice in this city. You're just an opportunist. Bondi didn't even smile. A symbol of justice? Then why are you shielding Hammond? Why did you try to bury his crimes? This courtroom isn't your symbol. It's the symbol of the law. The courtroom door swung open abruptly. 2 federal agents in black suits stepped inside. Bondi gave a subtle nod. This was the moment she'd planned for weeks. The agents moved silently toward the judge's bench. Ruiz stood, bewildered. What's happening here? She shouted, her voice thick with panic. Bondi gathered her files as she answered. I think this case is no longer in your hands, Your Honor. One of the agents stepped forward, holding a document. Judge Eleanor Ruiz, you are under arrest for federal corruption, abuse of power, and money laundering. The room exploded. Reporters pulled out their cameras. Jurors gaped in shock. Hammond's attorney, Lerner, sank into his chair, hands on his head. Ruiz clung to the bench, her face ashen. This is an outrage, she screamed. I'm innocent. I run this courtroom, Bondi replied calmly. Not anymore. You'll have plenty of time to prove your innocence. In prison. The agents grabbed Ruiz's arms. She struggled, pulling away. Let me go, she yelled. But when the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, her voice faded. The metallic click echoed through the room. As Ruiz was led away from the bench, once the fortress of her authority, her eyes locked onto Bondi, filled with rage, fear, and helplessness. Ruiz's exit plunged the courtroom into silence. Reporters scrambled to write their stories, while Bondi returned to her table. She turned her gaze to Gregory Hammond in the defendant's chair. He was hunched over, a shadow of the confident, charismatic activist he'd once been. Bondi looked at him and asked a single question. Do you want to talk, Mr. Hammond, or are you next? Hammond lifted his head. His eyes were wet, his voice shaky. Okay, I'll talk, he said, swallowing hard. But I want protection. I'll tell you everything. Who's involved, where the money went. Bondi nodded. Then start talking. But know this. If you lie, those handcuffs will be on your wrists next. Hammond took a deep breath. It all started with Ruiz, he said, his voice low but firm. She told me to redirect the funds. She said, if this money goes to the right hands, we all win. But the right hands were her friends, politicians, businessmen. A buzz rose in the room. Bondi listened intently, but her eyes flicked to the jury. They were stunned. A hero's mask was falling. Hammond's confessions turned the courtroom into a storm. Reporters grabbed their phones. Headlines were already being drafted. San Francisco judge arrested, environmental fund scandal. Bondi packed her files, her composure unshaken. This was her victory. But more importantly, it was the law's victory. Ruiz's empty chair had once been a symbol of her authority. Now it stood as a monument to how that authority had crumbled. Bondi rose from her table and faced the jury. Today, you saw that no one is above justice, she said, her voice strong yet steady. No matter how powerful you are, the truth will catch up eventually. Hammond's attorney, Lerner, slipped out of the room without a word. The activists among the spectators dispersed quietly. Their hero had turned into a fraud. Bondi slung her bag over her shoulder and headed for the door. But before leaving, she paused, taking one last look at the courtroom. This wasn't just a case. It was the cracking of a system. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Bondi. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Ms. Bondi, how will this case affect San Francisco?" one asked. Bondi stopped and faced the camera. "This case showed that no one is above the law. Justice doesn't bend to ideology or power. We proved that today." Then she pushed through the crowd and disappeared into the foggy San Francisco streets. Behind her, a judge had been handcuffed, a defendant had confessed, and a city was left reeling. For Bondi, though, it was just another day's work. Justice was a torch in her hands, and she'd keep carrying it forward.